So now we're on to the sex organs. So I have a blank screen because I'm going to let you draw them yourself. So again, we're doing sympathetic, parasympathetic, and psychosomatic illness on the grid. And I want to pose a question to you. One of these nervous systems is for arousal or erection in men, and the other nervous system is for ejaculation or orgasm in women. So which do you think is which? Okay, so some of you might be saying, I think it's the sympathetic nervous system is for arousal because we know that the sympathetic nervous system is for arousal of everything else. So that makes sense, right? And that's probably what I would guess too. But that's why I'm excited to teach you about this, because it's actually the opposite. And why I think that this is so valuable to you is, did you know that 80% of all people, that's 8 out of 10 of all people, will face a sexual dysfunction at some time in their life? So I think that this is a great opportunity for me to share with you how we can use our neuroscience to understand sexual dysfunctions and to work with them. So here's my typed up grid to have this on here so that you understand that the sympathetic nervous system is actually for orgasm and ejaculation, and the parasympathetic nervous system is for arousal and erection. And we know that most all sexual dysfunctions are due to anxiety. Erectile dysfunction for older men is a different process, but other than that, most sexual dysfunctions are a psychosomatic illness related to the way we feel and our stress. We'll also see infertility is involved around the sex organs. But let's just go into this a little bit. So the reason why it's really good for you to know this is that understanding that stress, in order for you to get properly aroused in both men and women, they need to be relaxed. So let's go over we're going to go over the 2 major sexual dysfunctions for men and the 2 major sexual dysfunctions for women. So the 2 major sexual dysfunctions for men are erectile dysfunction, which is erectile disorder where the man can't get an erection, and then the second most common one for men is premature ejaculation. So let's do the men first and then we'll do the women. So I already told you that as men age, that's a different process, and they may need like some help with Viagra or Cialis. Is basically what that's doing is it is allowing an enzyme that decreases in age to trap the blood in the penis for longer. But if there's something psychologically stressing him out, then the same thing will happen. So erectile dysfunction can happen for even young men. So let's say that a man is going to be with a woman and they've waited and they're so excited and tonight's the night, but he's nervous because he loves her and wants to impress her, and he wants to make this really special, and he starts to get really stressed out. And all of a sudden, oh no, he can't get an erection. So the more pressure that he puts on himself or his partner puts on him, the worse they make this. So if a man is under stress, like maybe he's under stress at work or something's really negative is happening in his life, all of a sudden he may experience this erectile dysfunction because his sympathetic nervous system is activated. So if that happens, both males and females should know about it and take the pressure off. No pressure. We can do lots of other things. Let's not even slow down the mood. Let's have lots of fun. And if it wants to come up, that's fine. If it doesn't, that's fine. So now let's talk about premature ejaculation. So actually, I was so surprised to learn this. Is that actually it's a learning disorder, and in a lot of cases, it's relatively easy to fix. So basically, what premature ejaculation is the man is going too fast from parasympathetic to sympathetic response. But let's look at that again. It's so fascinating. Okay, so all of a sudden he's got his erection, and then he gets nervous about, oh no, am I going to ejaculate too fast? Oh no, is it going to happen to me again? And sure enough, the moment that he gets nervous about it, then the sympathetic kicks in and he gets the premature ejaculation. So men have told me that it's kind of like a cliff. And so Once you hit this certain part in a cliff, there's nothing you can do. So basically, what sex therapists do is they take this knowledge that we're learning in this class about sympathetic, parasympathetic, and they start to teach them about it and say, oh, it's a cliff. And what you have to do is you have to learn how to not allow yourself to get to this cliff. So again, we're back to this kind of meditation thing where it's like meditating your frontal lobe so that the amygdala is not triggering the sympathetic response, relaxing about it, slowing down. So there's a joke that says, think about dead puppies. I know that's terrible, but think about something that's not arousing and understanding this whole process. And so basically what they do is they teach men how to masturbate and learn how to really be in control of that. And then slowly they move it on through visualization techniques and eventually being with a partner. Okay, let's go on to the females. So, the number 1 and 2 sexual dysfunctions are female orgasmic disorder. So first of all, let's get some statistics down on that one. Do you guys know what percentage of women can orgasm through penetration alone? Dun, dun, dun. Only 30%. So a lot of women cannot achieve orgasm through penetration alone. And so if you're thinking, oh no, I have that. Well, they estimate that approximately 10 to 15% of women in the United States have never had an orgasm, period. Oh my goodness. So there's kind of this orgasmic continuum. So like approximately 5 to 10% can orgasm through mental or just nipple stimulation. Remember that nipple stimulation, because we're going to go back to that oxytocin thing, and nipple stimulation releases oxytocin. So there's about 5 to 10% that can do that. And then then you add on to that, there's about 30% of women that can orgasm through penetration alone. And then there's 70% that's kind of left over, needs something else other than penetration. So let's go to that cool oxytocin that we learned about. This is really fascinating stuff. I'm hoping you're listening to this. So, I think a lot of you men and women know that female sexuality seems to be much more complex than male sexuality, and women have a much longer sexual response cycle. So, a male's sexual response cycle is very fast, and a woman's is slower. So, in any case, what is responsible for the uterine contractions of an orgasm is oxytocin. And that's in both men and women. You got the dopamine mix there, and both in men and women. But women especially, the uterine contractions are from oxytocin. And so we learned last time when we did the sex chapter, is we learned that oxytocin is released through touch, and it's for bonding. Guess what? The number 1 predictor of whether or not a woman will have an orgasm or not. Are you ready? It's whether or not she trusts the man. Oh, this neuroscience makes so much sense. Oxytocin is the trust hormone. And so let's look at, I have men, and they come to my sexuality class and they're like, Amy, I want to be a better lover. And I say, well, gosh, please don't take the class for that. There's so much more involved with that. I can set that up for you in just a sentence. And they're like, oh yeah, what's the sentence? I'm like, well, if you're with a woman, then you need to take your time and touch her all over to stimulate the oxytocin. Make sure you don't forget the nipples in just the right way. And then slowly, slowly, slowly build the trust. Take it slow. Make sure she trusts you. That builds up the oxytocin, and therefore your likelihood of achieving orgasm is much higher. So so there's how the oxytocin works in there. But let's look. If a woman is stressed out, she doesn't trust him, or she's stressed out, then she can't get aroused. And if she can't get aroused, then we can't go here to here. You have to go here first, then here. So that's why taking it slow, lots of touch, building the oxytocin, trust me, I'm not going to hurt you. Sure enough, would build this over, and then she could switch it to sympathetic. Now, ladies, I have to come down on you a little bit. Okay, so Masters and Johnson watched over 300 and some women masturbate in a laboratory, and guess what they found? They found that no 2 women masturbate the same. So these poor guys, every time they're with a different woman, they're with a whole different ballgame. So, expecting a man to know what he's doing with you and who you are is kind of crazy. You kind of are going to have to teach him a little bit about you. And guys, I hope you're listening to me and now you take the pressure off from yourself and say, "Oh, I'm not supposed to know about her. She has to teach me." Another thing is women, you have to understand this parasympathetic sympathetic thing is it's not sex is not a passive thing. A lot of women have to really use some kind of fantasy, kind of have to hold their breath, kind of have to take themselves to the edge to get it to switch from parasympathetic to sympathetic. Okay, I hope that's not too much information for you and I hope it's really valuable. Okay, let's go to the female arousal disorder and let's go with that too. So another very common disorder for women is not having the ability to become aroused. And so if a woman has had past sexual trauma or she is too stressed out about the thought about sex, maybe she doesn't trust him, maybe she's nervous about herself, then that makes such sense that if she's nervous, she can't get properly aroused. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is well, let me just hit on infertility a little bit. This whole sexual response, I mean, this whole sympathetic response right here is set up to keep you out of danger. And so it makes sense. It takes a lot of work and energy for the body to build the sperm, to release the egg. A lot of women who get super stressed out, like on all those survival shows, like Naked and Afraid, Survivor, so on and so forth, you don't ever see the women having their menstrual periods because a lot of their menstrual periods will stop. Now, I'm sure some of them still do, but when a woman gets under a lot of stress, her menstrual cycle stops. In addition, as men get stressed out, their sperm production goes way down. So we can see how that plays in. So right now though, I'd like to show you another differences between males and females with their brains during sex.
While the brain has evolved a fear response to keep us out of danger, it is also equipped with a Netherlands neuroscientist Dr. Gert Holstege is blazing a trail in sex research by revealing for the first time what happens in the brains of men and women during orgasm.
15 years ago it was not possible, but now with the neuroimaging techniques it's very well possible to see what's happening.
To find out, he needs volunteer couples. The man or woman agrees to be injected with a radioactive oxygen tracer and then stimulated to orgasm by their partner. While this happens, they lie with their head in a 3D imaging machine called a PET scanner.
The PET scanner is measuring only blood flow. It's measuring the amount of blood going to different parts of the brain.
The brain has many miles of blood vessels. When nerve cells are busy firing, they need lots of energy-laden and oxygen-rich blood. When they're not, they need very little.
So you see what brain regions take part in this whole thing of ejaculation or orgasm.
Aside from the obvious challenge facing the volunteers to reach orgasm in a laboratory setting, there is a time constraint too. The oxygen tracer has a half-life of just 2 minutes.
I think it would be tough to have an orgasm under these circumstances, under any of these circumstances. Everywhere in the world, we have the vast majority of our sex in private, unlike almost all other animals.
Fortunately,
we're going to bring
all other animals.
Fortunately, 11 men and 13 women did manage to get just right. And what this groundbreaking experiment revealed was a startling difference between male and female brain activity during sex.
The outcome was very surprising. When you look at the male brain during ejaculation or orgasm, then you see several parts activated.
During male orgasm, blood gushes to the top of the brainstem. As well as being one of the oldest parts of the human brain, it's the area that controls the release of dopamine across the brain. Dopamine is a type of hormone called a neurotransmitter. Scientists know dopamine generates very strong feelings we associate with pleasure.
What became clear is that the dopamine is released a little bit in advance of these things, like food and sex and drugs. So it's not, strictly speaking, a chemical of pleasure. It's a chemical of anticipation.
So you're getting a flood of dopamine. Dopamine is the same chemical that becomes active when you feel the rush of cocaine and the other stimulant drugs. So it's an overwhelming experience of ecstasy and energy.
The experiment showed that in men, blood was flowing away from areas of the brain that had to do with anxiety, but other areas remained alert.
In men, you will find deactivation of the amygdala and the region that have to do with anxiety or fear.
It's not surprising that other parts of the brain become deactivated so that you don't feel anxious, you don't feel scared, you're not thinking about anything except the orgasm.
Dr. Holstege found that women enjoy a similar dopamine experience to men. But what surprises him most is how much a woman's brain shuts down during orgasm.
The deactivation was the most important finding. In women, there was an enormous deactivation of all the centers of the brain that had to do with anxiety or fear or alertness. Apparently, women let it go.
Women can even go unconscious during orgasm, whereas men don't. Experts believe the difference between men and women may date back to prehistoric times when we were hunter-gatherers.
This may have an evolutionary purpose. You know, for millions of years we had our sex on the grasslands of Africa where there were dangerous animals roaming around. Somebody had to be alert enough to jump up and run or defend the group. And it's logical that that would be men. So the female brain tends to shut down more than the male brain does.
In a future set of tests, Dr. Holstege hopes to increase the time he can monitor what happens in our brains during sex. He's intrigued to see how rapidly the dopamine-induced feeling of euphoria drops away after orgasm.
I still think that there will be big differences between men and women, just before, during, and after orgasm. What exactly is then the difference in the brain? And that's what I want to know.